Welcome, ladies and gents, to another chat for our DreamCon 2020 virtual conference, Connecting and Securing the Enterprise. With me today, I have Derek Gilling. He's the CEO and co-founder of Moesif, and he's here today to talk about the top 10 security threats when it comes to APIs. We obviously understand that API management is important, API creation, but the fundamentals of best practice security is something that we would love to see implemented from the very start. And as you'll see from Derek's presentation today, a platform like Moesif not only enables that security, but also allows you to continually monitor to make sure that those best practices are being abided by. So Derek, over to you, mate.
Cool, and really thank you for having us today.
No worries.
Today, we're gonna walk through the top API security threats and also some ways to actually mitigate some of these threats. But before jumping into things, a little bit about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Moesif, the API analytics and observability platform. My focus areas include API strategy, security, observability. Little known fact is I love IPAs. A little hard to go out today these days with COVID going on, but
yeah.
Cool. So why are we talking about API security? APIs are extremely powerful. They provide programmatic access to your developers, direct access to data. You're able to actually access a lot of resources very quickly, given most of these are created by actual applications running in your customer's infrastructure. With that said, comes a lot of risk. And so today I'm going to walk through some of these threats and what are some ways that you can actually reduce them. Let's talk about the first one, which is insecure pagination resource limits. API pagination is a common attack vector. Why? Because it's an easy way for you to scrape a lot of data from an API. An easy way for you to do this is just start with the first API call, fetch 10 items, move to the next API call, fetch the next 10 items, and you can literally paginate through your entire database. Now, normally, this might be safe that there's no direct PII information. However, once that attacker downloaded your entire database, now they can use other attack vectors like rainbow tables, dictionary attacks. And you may be thinking, well, what if I just add a limit on the pagination count? You can only take 100 at a time or something. Well, an attacker can come in and say, let's add some randomization, right? That way they can bypass some anomaly detection detectors. In addition, they can add some delays. That way they're able to circumvent your rate limits. So really all you're doing here by adding these limitations to your API, you're making it chatty. They're still able to grab that information, as in this Python example here. How do you secure this? Well, one of the things with looking at a solution like Moesif and Dream Factory, you can actually track usage at the user level. This way you can break down things like how many items were touched by a user within a certain period, how many objects were downloaded. In this case, we can see these two users downloading a much larger amount of data versus the rest of our long tail users in this graph here.
I think a good point here, Derek, is to understand for users as well that this is important for both external facing APIs and internal APIs, right? Because something like that, while it might not be malicious, the idea of being able to, large number of items touched at the user level, we need to be able to identify and restrict users inside the organization as well as outside the organization.
Exactly. And two things we always recommend is one, ensuring you have an audit-friendly way for you to understand which services are accessing your APIs, even if those are internal services. For example, you're not going to give your root password to every employee at the organization. So understanding what roles they have, limiting those roles, and then tracking that with a platform like Dream Factory and Moesif is really critical to make sure that there is no vulnerabilities there.
Yeah, and that really harks back to one of Dream Factory's security principles in that Dream Factory never publishes an insecure API. Once the Dream Factory actually auto-generates the API, you must apply a user and a role and assign it to the application before you can actually consume that API. So by the inherent design of the auto-generated API, you're never going to have that problem of not knowingly distributing that API for consumption without the appropriate user set. I guess the problem comes when we become too liberal with what we regard as, the user that needs access to that API. And that's where the human error may come into it, right? We need to be able to understand that just by applying a user group, that user group actually needs access to that API and that there's going to be a fair use policy of how they use that API in accordance with whatever corporate sort of guidelines there are.
Definitely, and having that process in place is always important, so you're able to limit those user errors. Cool. So let's move through the next piece, which is insecure API key generation. A lot of DDoS protection systems will leverage things like IP address, HTTP headers, which may include authentication information for fingerprinting. However, one thing that can happen is, well, a hacker can use multiple different API keys, multiple different IP addresses from many different devices. You've probably seen the whole vulnerabilities coming from IoT and other connected devices on the internet. Those are effectively just devices sitting there that are connected and generate this traffic. This makes it actually pretty easy for a hacker to circumvent some of these methods because you don't have things like CAPTCHAs, browser fingerprinting that can give a lot more visibility into, is this person real? Is this person a hacker? How do you actually fix this? Well, there's actually a really easy way to do it. Leverage an API gateway solution that generates these keys securely, right? These are generated through things like SAML or SSO. You can use stuff like OAuth 1 or 2, or things like two-factor authentication. You're ensuring that the generation of these keys cannot be used by a hacker to generate what we call a pool of API keys.
Yeah, and on that too, Derek, I guess that's the next layer of that Dream Factory security principle is we offer that integration with all those necessary authentication layers. So we always recommend that not only do you use the sort of organic Dream Factory role-based access control, but you then apply the authentication layer on top of that. And we support obviously Okta, Active Directory, OAuth, and all those sort of standard authentication layers. And they become really important when you're talking about enterprise level security in particular, because if you're able to define those groups on the enterprise level, it makes it easy for the user, but it also increases security, far beyond what a standard API, insecure API key may look like.
Definitely. Cool. So, and this boils down to the next piece, which is increased risk of key exposure. Why is there actually a risk of key exposure? Well, someone that's using an API, they're handling those credentials directly. They're copying them into Postman, right? They might be copying them into their code. In addition, API keys themselves are bearer tokens. You don't need a SMS message or two-factor authentication to authenticate that that key is correct. All you need is the key. So what are ways to actually fix this? Oops. One of the easiest ways is what we call short-lived API keys. Using a gateway solution, you're able to refresh these tokens, make sure that even if that key does get leaked somewhere, maybe it only lasts a couple hours, maybe it only lasts a couple minutes. By the time a hacker finds in GitHub or was able to parse it in some logs, the key is no longer valid. In addition, you should actually store these keys in a secure spot, whether those are environmental variables, using a secure key store, like on AWS or other systems. Let's move on to the next one. Exposure to DDoS problems, availability issues. One of the great things with APIs, you are able to suck out a lot of data. These are usually accessed by other folks' servers, right? Usually, if you're logging into a website, a real customer is probably not going to impact your website, even though it's just one person. But a real customer, when they're accessing an API, could inadvertently bring down your entire system if you don't have the right mechanisms in place. When it comes to increasing availability and reducing exposure, API rate limits is almost the equivalent of a CAPTCHA, right? What we recommend doing is ensuring these rate limits are specific to certain resources, should be specific to certain users, right? So your enterprise users or your larger customers might have a different level of rate limits than a new person that is not trusted yet. In addition, you should have the ability to deactivate these abusers if you do see that. And leveraging a system like Moesif can give you those alerts and that visibility to know when you should deactivate those API keys. Finally, you should have a way to inspect these rate limits, right? So you can understand when someone is going over the rate limits, reach out to them, let them know, hey, there's something wrong with the integration. This is the right way you should implement this. Moving on to number 5, incorrect server security. This is an easy one, but it's very easy to also get wrong, right? In general, most people want to access an API through SSL, HTTPS traffic. So easy fix, Use some type of a gateway or something at your edge to block that non-HTTPS traffic. Use a simple rule that's added. In addition, ensure that your SSL certificates are kept up to date. Finally, audit your HTTP headers, things like cross-origin sharing.
Yeah, I think, Derek, this to me is something that's become increasingly important from some of our engagements with clients and companies out there, where it really is probably something that gets pushed to the wayside sometimes, the refresh and the review of server security, and in particular the formatting and how they've actually optimized that server for consumption. And from what we found is the ability to apply a checklist as we're going through the process of integrating something like Dream Factory, and just to check off to make sure that from a client side that it's all in order to increase their security internally before we actually then start to integrate Dream Factory, so we don't experience any errors or configuration issues on our end. And it's also just good practice for us as well to understand what that client infrastructure looks like, what do we need to do to enhance the security, and is there anything we can suggest to them to help them, you know, increase their security on the server side. So yeah, I think this is an important point.
Definitely agree there, and especially as you add, you know, ready-made solutions like Dream Factory and Moesif, you're able to get that visibility so you can make these audits very quick, point out the problems so that you're able to take action. A lot of times mistakes happen just because no one knew it was there or no one was responsible for those mistakes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's it, right? It's those second set of eyes coming in that may recognize things that you wouldn't internally, because it's just BAU for so long that it just sits there sort of going away. And it's not until you either get an attack or you lose a server that you realize, oh, perhaps we should have done something about this earlier. So yeah, completely agree.
It's too late by the time you have an attack, right? Hopefully we never get there.
That's it.
Cool. So one of the next things, which is an interesting one specific to APIs, is incorrect cache headers. You know, we all love caching. We want to make sure our APIs and services are performant. However, you know, a lot of times APIs are secured through very interesting but non-standard headers. You know, x-API key, x-custom key. Even if you don't leverage caching for your own API, your customers may. For example, they need to get around rate limits. They have connection limits because they have a lot of servers talking to your API. They want to reduce round trip latency. So one thing we usually recommend is make sure you can audit your cache headers, make sure they're properly configured. And also, you know, if you do have a custom header or query parameter that's leveraged for authentication, either disable caching altogether or ensure it's part of your vary header.
Yeah, so Dream Factory acknowledges this problem, and we actually don't cache by default. It's an option for our clients to enable local caching, and then we also offer additional caching, you know, with Redis, Memcache, etc. So yeah, it's something you need to consider when you're configuring that environment.
Totally agree there. Moving on to number 7, insufficient logging and monitoring. OWASP put out a new top 10 API security threats. Logging is one of the largest just because a lot of times you miss the things that are actually causing attacks. For example, if you're only logging internal execution logs, then you're not going to see those 401 errors, these caching errors I just mentioned in the last step. In addition, if you're not keeping your logs around long enough, then you might not even have the right logs to do forensics. On average, it takes around 200 days to even discover that you have an attack before you can even fix it.
This point, I think, has become more and more important regarding legislative compliance, such as GDPR, HIPAA, just the management of PII in general, because logging and monitoring enables you to maintain compliance with that legislation in particular. The fact that you're handling that data is one thing, but if you're unable to put your finger on where that data is being stored, who's accessing it, what potential breaches have occurred and in what time frame, then you open yourself up, and when I say yourself, the enterprise, the organization, to a whole world of hurt. So having an appropriate logging and monitoring solution and a logging and monitoring procedure or process, I think is more important than ever these days, particularly considering the punishment surrounding non-compliance with those heavy legislative items such as GDPR or HIPAA.
And that definitely brings up a good point. When you think about your logging and monitoring, we always recommend tracking at least 2 different things. One, who accessed your API, and then what did they access, right? If you're only tracking the actual items being accessed, then there's no way for you to ensure you're GDPR compliant. You need a way, an operational procedure to delete logs or anonymize those logs, right, when you do get that request coming in. In addition, you need a way for you to do your forensics so you can understand, when someone might be hacking your system, okay, what else did they access, right? What else did was exposed to this particular hacker? Lastly, but not the least important, is not securing internal endpoints. Many APIs that we've seen have both endpoints for external users, but they may also be used by internal services. Sometimes these are called service users, service applications. Many times these might be accidentally open. This can provide a very large attack surface, especially if these internal endpoints bypass the usual checks that you have for your external endpoints.
Derek, do you think in the world of 2020, where the migration to working from home and remote working services, do you think this point in particular has become more prevalent in that what would otherwise be an internal endpoint within a localized infrastructure has now become an internal endpoint on an external infrastructure for those working from home or via remote services?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. A lot of times you might have some IP address blocks, you have a firewall, it's only accessible by your internal network. But as soon as one of those APIs, maybe you didn't think it's that big of a deal, but it had some legacy code in there for some admin access that could dump all your users or social security numbers. Didn't realize it, but it just provided that window for attacker to leverage.
Yeah.
And this is why it's super important for you to ensure every single internal service also uses the same security and role-based access control that your normal external endpoints also use, right? Make sure that these credentials are audit friendly, so you're able to dig in and understand who is accessing what, and also be able to deactivate a service. If a key was linked or leaked somehow, you want to be able to deactivate that one single service rather than bringing down your entire infrastructure. Finally, make sure you short-lived tokens that can be refreshed just like you would as an external customer.
Yeah, and this speaks back to my previous point about the importance of not putting into production an insecure API, but importantly, why Dream Factory places so much emphasis on role-based access control to the point where you can refine access to an API down to the read, the write, delete level, and you can actually then go further down to individual table and row access for right down to that higher level of fidelity. And that obviously takes a level of scrutiny from the management team, or whether that's the team that is responsible for creating the service or the database access that's required. But having that fidelity to apply that level of control is supremely important, I feel.
Definitely. And to add on that, once you do have that RBAC, having a way to audit and then come back and ensure that you are tracking these things and you'll be able to provide to your forensics team ways for you to understand, is this truly secure? So as a final takeaway, API threats are real, but they're becoming more prevalent, especially when single page apps, mobile apps are also consuming APIs these days. They can be prevented with the right mindset, but does it require thinking about APIs differently than a more traditional web app-based monitoring solution or security solution. That's all I have when it comes to API security. If there are any further questions, feel free to reach out to Derek@moesif.com. We always love talk about API security, observability, analytics, and I'm sure Luke can talk about a lot around API management and best practices around role-based access control and such.
Derek, can I ask, what would you suggest to our attendees today? What are some of the trends you're seeing in regards to analytics? What are the important points that people should note when using a platform like Moesif? What are they seeking to achieve by using something like Moesif?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that they're looking for. Usually it boils down to one of two buckets. Bucket number one is business insights, right? Product insights, understanding how their products are used by their customers. Number two is the engineering metrics, right? This is understanding stuff like SLA metrics, latency metrics, that type of stuff. When you take these two buckets, these are usually fed to other areas like security teams, could be at the leadership level to understand when endpoints should be deprecated, when new endpoints should be rolled out, when you roll out a new version, who is actually using it, right? There's a lot of different reasons why you should have analytics. However, when you think about API analytics in general, ensuring that you're able to tie it back to user is a fundamental piece. Without that part, then everything we talk about here with security, product analytics is moot, right? Because you can't really do much with it.
Yeah, exactly. And do you feel when assessing the likelihood of implementation of an analytics platform, or an API analytics platform, are companies and organizations now starting to move that consideration more to the start of the project, or do you still find Moesif in particular coming in after sort of the API infrastructure has been developed and then we realize that we need something like analytics? Because I feel that analytics monitoring, the preventative measures for something like a security breach or unauthorized API access, etc., they're becoming less of an afterthought now because people and organizations are starting to understand the consequence of the security threat being realized, right? So we can assess the security threat, apply the controls, and then prevent the outcome. But we're now seeing these large-scale cases out in the world where the consequence is catastrophic. So do you feel that companies are assessing platforms like Moesif further forward in their consideration cycle, or is it still something that's sort of not given enough budget, not given enough time, and is coming in after the fact?
I would say definitely, especially after COVID, it's usually one of the first things new API provider is thinking about. What does my entire API stack look like? And your API stack encompasses a couple of different components. One, things like your API gateway, your API management solution. Then on top of that, you want to think about API observability. And having that day one ensures that that rollout is successful, right? Otherwise, you're flying blind, right? How do you know that there are no issues with this API you just deployed? And then your third piece is things around documentation. How can you actually improve the developer experience? Whether those are internal developers, they could be external customers. Things like Swagger or Open API Spec can go a long ways here.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And again, if I can speak back to why Dream Factory and Moesif, I feel work well together. Dream Factory fundamentally auto-generates an API, standard API, fully Swagger documented. We have all those endpoints secured through role-based access control, layered on top with an authentication layer, ready for consumption in a few minutes, right? When we apply that bouncing ball. From there, a platform like Moesif, almost needs to, in an enterprise setting, sit alongside that API or that cluster of APIs, that stack of services, to ensure ongoing security and maintenance, right? Ongoing visibility into the usage, and really give you the insights and the warning signals that something might not be right early on in the case, as opposed to when it's too late. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good point. If it's becoming more of the norm to understand that monitoring the analytics, the API, I should say, is something that should be talked about at the start of a project, then that's, I think, beneficial to both of us, because that's what we're really pushing when it comes to securing the enterprise. Security needs to come first, right at that first instance, and it needs to be the building block of everything you're doing when it comes to APIs, I feel.
Definitely agree there. And there's this whole notion around API observability and API ops, which is that process to roll out a new API. What is your checkbox requirements in order for that API to be deployed? Many times it means you have to have the right versioning in place. You have to have the right observability in place. There may be a few things around security they need to audit. And without these components like Dream Factory and Moesif, you're really just going on a whim, right? You might have one developer that follows a process, but you might have another developer that inadvertently just skips one of those steps, right? Having these processes in place ensures that your API deployment procedures are operationalized.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, to all our viewers out there, if anyone wants to talk about a checklist, a deployment process, how to cultivate that within your organization, if you're struggling to present something like that management, then Derek and I are both available for that sort of consultation and to really help you flesh out what what a thorough and robust API strategy is, all the way from creation, development through to analytics and monitoring. So we're both obviously available, as Derek said. His email's there. You can find my contact details on the conference page as well. Derek, is there anything else you'd like to call out, mate, before we wrap up?
No, I think that covers it. And really thank you for having us here, and always happy to chat more around API security and observability.
No worries. And thank you for making the time, Derek. It's been immensely valuable. And obviously Dream Factory recognizes the importance of a platform like Moesif. And we sponsor that usage alongside our auto-generated APIs. For our attendees, you can view our conference site and identify some talks with myself and my CTO, Jason Gilmore, where we talk about actually leading with an API strategy. And we will discuss the fundamentals of security analytics and the role they have to play in rolling out an enterprise-wide API strategy. And obviously connecting and securing the enterprise is what APIs enable you to do. So we would like to push that in our other talks. Please have a look and view those other chats. And Derek, I thank you again, mate. Great talking to you. And I look forward to working more with Moesif in the future.
Definitely. Thank you too, Luke. Bye.